Good evening and good morning, everybody, and welcome to Tata Literature Live, the 11th annual Mumbai International Lit Fest, and the first one to be completely digital, co-sponsored by Tata Projects and Tata Steel. As the 46th president-elect takes up the reins at the Oval Office amidst socio-economic unrest at home and geopolitical friction and climate change on a global level, how do the American institutions and its society affect the world at large? To weigh in on exactly that are our esteemed panelists for this evening. Our first speaker, Mr. Bhaskar Sunkara, is an editor, columnist, and publisher of Jacobin magazine and Catalyst. Mr. Sunkara is also the author of The Social Manifesto, The Case for Radical Politics in the Era of Extreme Inequality. Our second speaker, Mr. Nathan Robinson, is an author, editor of Current Affairs magazine, and a political columnist who is currently a PhD student in sociology and social policy at Harvard University. The latest of 10 books he has authored is Trump, Anatomy of a Monstrosity. Our third speaker, Ms. Seema Sirohi, is a journalist and columnist for International Affairs, who has worked on India-US relations for more than 2 decades for various media outlets and think tanks in Washington, D.C. Our fourth speaker for this evening, Mr. Puneet Ahluwalia, is the president of New World Strategies, who specializes in assisting companies and organizations in navigating with various US federal and state agencies. Mr. Ahluwalia is also the Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia in 2021. Chairing this panel discussion is Ms. Gargi Rawat, senior news anchor and environment reporter with NDTV 24/7. The panel discussion will be followed by a quick Q&A segment with the audience. So do write to us and send in your questions or responses even during the session through the chat box of your viewing platform. Dear audience, please join me in welcoming our speakers, Bhaskar Sunkara, Nathan Robinson, Seema Sirohi, Puneet Ahluwalia, and Gargi Rawat.
Thank you so much for that, Veronica. Well, let's get started. There's so much that we need to talk about. Everybody wants to know about, what the next 4 years are going to be like with the Biden administration, what it means for the world. And I'd like to start with you, Nathan. I'd like to talk about the elections right now because, while many across the world are relieved that Biden won, many in India are also relieved Biden won. Many, though I have to say, were supporting Trump in India. But the margin of victory was so narrow, and that's something that was very surprising for many of us, given what the exit polls were saying, given the kind of the coverage and press we'd seen, the criticism of Trump and his handling of the pandemic as well. But even so, what happened? Why was the margin of victory so narrow?
Well, there are a number of different explanations. But one thing that's happening in the Democratic Party right now is the centrists are accusing leftists of being the reason that the Democrats did not do very well, and we on the left have a sort of different explanation. It's true that for a lot there was talk of a Biden landslide, and there were all these polls that showed him very far ahead. I was very cautious because, of course, 2016, basically the exact same thing happened. And a lot of us on the left at that point were saying that, well, the Democratic Party is running these uninspiring candidates who are not really offering anything other than not being Trump. And Trump's base is very, very motivated. And how do you have to counter that with a really clear and powerful message? And in fact, in swing districts, all these centrist Democrats lost their seats in the House. They didn't recapture the Senate. Everyone thought they were going to recapture the Senate. So I think, I think the lesson here is that, the turnout for Trump was much higher than people expected. There's still a lot of enthusiasm for him. And I think we have to understand what the source of that is, that he has a real appeal. And, Democrats will point to increased turnout as well on their side. But what is very, very clear is that there has not been a repudiation of Trump, and that if the Biden administration fails, if it disappoints people, then we're going to see probably, I would expect, a resurgence of either Trump in 2024 or Trumpism. because the Democratic Party has not shown that it can give Americans something that they overwhelmingly want to get behind, even, as you say, after this pandemic, where if, all of the conditions were basically as favorable for the challenger as they could possibly have been, in that the incumbent president had presided over a complete disaster, which he had been sort of very publicly irresponsible about. So yeah, it's a concerning sign for the Democratic Party, even though they're squeaking into office.
Right, and just a short follow-up question. Trump got a lot of support among, various groups of people that we perhaps didn't expect to support him. Is that something that's going to be analyzed as well?
Yeah, of course, Hispanic voters and even black voters, he made inroads among that people did not expect he could. And I think the explanation for that is obvious, right? They didn't expect it because Democrats take voters of color for granted, right? They just assume that it could not be possible for people to support Trump, and they don't understand. I mean, they assume that the calculation is Trump is racist, therefore non-white people will not vote for him. It's really that simple. But you have to understand that Trump has a real appeal. This restoring American greatness thing appeals, and he's not explicitly racist a lot of the time. So it has a real power to lure people in.
All right, Bhaskar, I'd like to come to you next. And there's been a lot of excitement and elation in India over Kamala Harris, of course, because of her identity. But we want to know more about, her policy stands. Your magazine, Jacobin, did a piece on her about how hawkish she was in terms of prosecution. So tell us, what do you feel, if you can share a bit about her stance that she's taken in the past?
So yes, I'm critical of Harris, but I do think she's more or less a middle-of-the-road Democrat. So often when you're administrating at a local level, especially if you're a DA, every Democrat 5-6 years ago was taking those sorts of stances on criminal justice, on policing, which saw her take, let's say, a more carceral approach than a lot of Democrats, at least in their rhetoric, would advocate for today. As far as her policies in the domestic front, they've been a mixed bag. She was one of the initial sponsors of the Medicare for All bill, our bill in the United States for a universal healthcare system, guaranteed for and paid for by the government. But during the Democratic Party campaign, she walked away from that pledge a little bit and offered a more watered down plan. So I would say, what should we expect for her? She's a center-left politician in the American context. She certainly is not going to get the grassroots base of the Democratic Party fired up on the left. I think part of her appeal, of course, for Biden was that he pledged to have a female running mate if he was to win the election. The Democratic Party is disproportionately supported by people of color in the United States. So obviously there was some demographic considerations and balancing out the tickets. But as far as her record, she's accomplished, competent, and just a middle-of-the-road Democrat. So I have the same criticisms I have as of her as I do of other similar Democrats. But I would say that often what people say about Joe Biden is that Biden doesn't really believe anything. He's kind of a weather vane for the party. I don't think that's exactly true. I think Biden, over the course of his career, has actually staked out a position as, I guess, what you could generously call a third-way modernizer within the Democratic Party. So someone who advocated a more liberal approach when it comes to trade policies, a more pro-corporate approach than, let's say, the Democratic Party was associated with in the 1970s. Harris, though, I think actually fits that description. I think she really is a middle-of-the-road Democrat who can be pushed to the left, who has at various times been dragged a little bit into, on criminal justice issues, more hawkish stances. But I really do think she's something of a weather vane.
And just a follow-up to that is, you're coming out after you've had major protests in the U.S. against police brutality and, the Black Lives Matter movement, etc. That's going to be a big challenge for the Biden-Harris administration in terms of healing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem with a lot of this discussion is just it's all very vague and abstract. I think there's certain policies the Biden administration can enact to improve police training, to change police practices, or at least try to push that change at the state and local level. Obviously, in the United States, our system is a very federal system. It's kind of difficult to make a change from just having the executive of the government, but especially on the issue of mass incarceration, there's a lot that Biden and Harris can do. So I think rather than furthering a conversation, which is often, again, a very vague conversation, that's more rhetoric on both sides than anything else, I think there's really concrete measures that can be taken. And we'll really see what the Democratic Party is going to do, because a lot of the Democratic Party has embraced, at times, a very fringe and identitarian rhetoric, saying that they care about these issues. But now that they're actually in a position where they can make some change, even through executive orders, which means in the United States, you could actually do quite expansive things with just the presidency, even without Congress. We'll see the change that could actually be done. I'm very wary that the party will just continue to embrace rhetorical overtures to these movements without making any actual concrete concessions.
Right, though the expectation is that it will take some action. I think the time for talking has been in the past, and it is time for action. And once Biden does take over his administration, this is one of the big challenges he's going to have to act on. Seema Sirohi, as somebody who's been watching U.S. politics for so long, and now we're going into a new era with a Biden administration over the next 4 years. What will be very interesting for everyone, and what everybody is really wondering about, is the foreign policy of the Biden administration, and what are the big challenges, especially when it comes to China?
Well, yes, the one thing the Trump administration did, this is especially true for people in India and other Asian countries, is to clarify the China challenge. I think the Democrats will continue with some of his policies on China, but the rhetoric will not be as sharp. They will go to Europe and sort of make amends, because Trump pretty much made everybody angry in Europe, from Germany to France to everybody. So his first project is going to be, repairing the transatlantic partnerships, and then perhaps combining forces to take on the China challenge. My fear is that the Democrats are so prone to debating everything that they'll go back to the Obama-era policies on China, which was basically China had an 8-year holiday during Obama. They built the artificial islands at that time. They did everything that the world is now worried about. Those things happened during those 8 years. So that's that. Let's hope that the slightly more stronger elements within his advisors will have primacy on China, and not those who are, the so-called restorationists who want to just go back to Obama-era policies.
But can they really just go back to Obama-era policies? Because this 4 years of the Trump administration, he's been such a disruptor in a sense, turned things on their head, and taken really strong actions, which is something that his supporters appreciate him for. So, given that, do you really think Biden can go back to what the Obama policy used to be?
See, Biden really wants to do something on climate change, and the Chinese are so good at entangling everybody in, long-term negotiations. We know that, right? In India, we know that how talks can just go on and on and on with no result at the end. So, if the Democrats debate for too long, that's good news for China, basically. So there is some move, what I keep reading or what I keep hearing is, in order to get the Chinese to start, stop stealing intellectual property or do all of the things they've been doing, the Americans or the Democrats would be willing to give them some space. There is no question that China will have more room to maneuver under a Biden administration. That's my feeling.
All right. Puneet Ahluwalia, I'd like your views on the elections as well. And, what is your opinion on how the elections went? Also, what are the challenges that you see for the Biden administration?
Thank you for having me. First thing is, I think the Democrats and the Liberal Party was against President Trump from the day he won the election. It was a shocker to them, and you saw the Antifa and all the Democratic Party base coming out and even writing the day he was taking the oath in January 2016. So it's been an all-through process to find ways for him not to be successful. But despite that, you see that this election was very close, and all the media has still gone out and called this election for Biden. We are a country of rules and laws. Please understand that. There will be a smooth transition. I just want the world to know that. We believe in Constitution as Republicans, as conservative, as Americans. It's more important, do the American people more on the liberal side are going to be Americans or going to be more on the water or more on the party lines? So I believe this transition will take place once President Trump feels that all the valid votes have been, or legible votes have been counted.
And transition to the Biden administration, right?
Yeah, well, whatever it is. And again, don't put your words, don't put your words in my mouth. Whoever is the winner will have a smooth transition. Would it be President Trump or Vice President Biden? So it'll be there, and I can. And again, the liberals can frown and they can throw the his fit, but that's what they do best. And they burn cities and burn states, and they find ways to demonize a candidate who's done more for the American people and more for the world, if you look at it. I just do want to touch upon, like, nobody, as Seema said very correctly, for 8 years the world slept while China got emboldened. China is the one, we had the Wuhan virus. It's a Chinese virus that basically killed American people. You never held them responsible. In the meantime, they were having these sham trials against President Trump to, derail and again, find ways to impeach him.
Well, speaking of the pandemic, what is your opinion on how the Trump administration handled it?
Well, today, CNN is coming out and saying, great job done by the President Trump administration in funding the medicine in the shortest span of time. It's never happened before. We have a vaccine which started in, I understand, the test results in March, and today we have, in a record time, again, under President Trump and Vice President Pence, they were able to do it, to find a cure for that. And I believe there was a deliberate means to stall the economy, to hurt the American people by the Democratic Party. And that's the reason they lost. They lost the election, and that's the reason why we retained the Senate. We have got more, we've gained 10 seats. And I'll tell you, the biggest issue for whoever is coming in is going to be basically the economy and China. And most importantly, how do you really take on, taking care of the people in COVID? Because not only people will be sick, but you'll also have the mental health crisis, the emotional crisis, and the financial crisis. There's a tsunami that's coming in. And most folks don't really know right now that if we are so embroiled in fighting each other, whereas people on the outside are basically redefining what is USA is going to be like. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, they're all getting emboldened.
And don't you think that's a reason to have this transition happen smoothly and earlier than later?
Well, Gargi, don't rush to judgment. This will take place. We have had democracy in our country, and we will continue to have democracy in our country. Don't let the liberal newspapers define that we are in a state of chaos. We are not. We have rules and regulation. There'll be a smooth transition. Whoever will be sworn in on January 20th.
Right. Nathan, your response to what Mr. Ahluwalia has said?
Well, I mean, there are so many points to respond to. I mean, the first point is that the Democrats on the left should have opposed Donald Trump from day one, because, I mean, if you take the most serious issue affecting the world at the moment, climate change, we had an administration that was simply flatly in denial about the problem, that has actually tried to eliminate whatever protections we have available, that has been gutting environmental regulations. It was important. I mean, I wish they'd taken a much, much harder line because of the threat that poses to millions upon millions of lives. I'm fine if you want to say, oh, if we want, if you want to pretend that Biden didn't win the election until all, that's fine. I agree. I agree. We're going to have someone sworn in in January. It's going to be Joe Biden. If we want to create some doubt okay, whatever. I think it's dangerous to launch spurious allegations of election fraud, which is a lot of what the president has been doing, is taking things that don't really have evidence, taking one anecdote from one place, and using it to suggest that the election has been stolen. Right? So it's one thing to say, count all the votes. Of course we have to count all the votes. If you want to say until, even with giant leads that can't possibly be surmounted, we're not going to admit what is the result of the election. But the problem is, and the real criticism that is made of the president, is that without any evidence, he kind of suggests that there has been an effort to take the election from him unjustly, and that if Joe Biden is eventually certified the winner, sworn in, the president will still have cultivated a sense among his base that Joe Biden is not a legitimate president and did not win the election. That's really the problem. I'm less concerned about the smooth transition thing, which I think will happen, than creating this idea that that Joe Biden didn't actually win the election. There was theft.
Gargi, let me just respond quickly to two things. One thing is, if you go
we're not going to be debating the election.
We're not debating.
We're going to talk more about the Biden years and what we can expect. Okay, quick response.
Yeah, I want to tell him, go to Heritage Foundation website and you'll see 1129 cases of criminal conviction and 1298 cases on instance of voter fraud to be verified and validated on Heritage Foundation, most respectable think tank. But secondly, on climate change, you mentioned, when Obama goes and signs the accord and makes the whole world feel that there is a climate change, he did not have the support of the Senate. He did not have the support of the Congress. Basically, you all were hooked and hoodwinked into signing a climate accord, which Obama made as an executive order. So please understand, we are a country of laws. And at the same time, you wanted to give $700 million of taxpayers' money on the Green Climate Fund. So it's important for you to understand, Nathan, you had no business going on signing the accord when you didn't have the support of the Senate and the Congress.
Do you understand the scale of the problem? When you say tell the world there is a climate change, do you believe in it?
Climate change. Nathan, I want to ask you about that, about how in the Democratic Party itself, there are these, different groups as well. And, you have this whole rise of this anti-corporate progressive group. And how much influence will they have on these issues, like you're talking about health insurance, environment, etc.? Yeah. How much influence do you think they will have on the Biden administration?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, they had some influence on the development of Biden's platform, right? The Sunrise Movement actually managed to push Joe Biden to adopt a far more robust climate policy. What the left can do when Biden is in office remains to be seen. He's picked his transition team, and it's an interesting, it's not the worst mix of people that we could have hoped for. There's a lot of people from the corporate sector. There's some people from trade unions and progressive groups. So I think actually it's a little bit of an unknown. Those of us on the left basically just see our job as how do we make sure that the Biden administration, how do we make sure that they are held accountable if they aren't doing enough on things like climate change? How do we make sure that they adopt a healthcare policy that is actually going to substantively change people's lives and make sure they don't financially struggle when they have to go to the doctor? These are the things that we on the left, and we don't know if we'll succeed, but I think Bhaskar would agree that our challenge right now is to at least expose the shortcomings of the Biden administration and push them.
Right. Bhaskar, the economic challenge is massive. This pandemic has also brought these, economic inequalities. Really, it's made it more glaring. And that is something that Biden would have to act on fast, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also when we think about the rise of Trump, well, first of all, I should say I do disagree that the election was that close. I mean, Biden did win, I think, when it's all said and done, by around 4.4% or so of the vote. And in a two-party system, in a first past the post two-party system, that's actually a fairly significant amount. I think as much as I criticize Biden in particular and the Democratic Party in general, it's worth noting, I think, that at least a portion of the results are because the U.S. has a fairly anti-majoritarian, whether it's good or bad, that's the way the Constitution writes it, I think it's bad, system that prevents these large mandates from being formed. But I do think that when Trump came to power, and also his continued base of support, which is very real, suggests that there's a lot of people who are discontent with the status quo. They were discontent with the liberal Obama years. And in order to speak to that discontent in a progressive way, the Democratic Party really needs to focus on broad-based majoritarian economic issues. That means healthcare, that means jobs, that means a different set of trade arrangements that focus primarily on what these agreements are doing, not for the economy in the abstract at an aggregate level, but what is it particularly being done to working class communities. And even though I think Trump didn't have the solutions for many of these working class people that voted for him in 2016, he at the very least spoke to some of that anger. And I think all around the world, you're seeing the rise of forms of right-wing populism and different forms of that. And I think the solution to it is not just a kind of hectoring liberal cosmopolitanism. I think it really is a program of economic egalitarianism. And my real worry with the Democratic Party is that they'll focus a lot on the return of American norms. They'll focus a lot on Joe Biden being a pretty friendly guy, and in their mind, and in my mind as well, I think a better statesman than Donald Trump. And there won't be a lot of concern about this base of Donald Trump supporters. Many of them, I think, actually can be won over to a different set of politics. If you look at 2016, Trump's victory, a lot of those voters were Obama voters in 2008 and 2012. So you can't tell me, like a lot of liberal pundits do, that these people voted for Obama twice, but then voted for Trump in 2016 because they're racist. It just doesn't compute at any level.
All right, interesting. So this effort also has to be made to, win over those supporting Trump. Seema, I'd like your view also on this.
Well, looking at it, as an outsider, it's very interesting. To me, what's become clear over the past 3 elections is that America is basically 2 angry halves, and one half doesn't talk to the other. After the shock of 2016, where nobody expected Donald Trump to win, including Donald Trump himself, there was some effort made by the mainstream media and the liberal press to send out reporters to the middle of the country and to learn about these average people who had lost jobs in globalization and all that. That effort was, in my opinion, a little grudging, and it was short-lived because, again, the surveys in this year's surveys missed those voters, right? Every pollster, no pollster expected Trump to give such a good performance. We have to remember that 10 million more Americans voted for Trump this time, more than 2016. So what does that mean? That with his record, they're still willing to go with him. That should tell the other half something, and to see why this polarization is there. One thing what I notice is that there is a great sort of condescension on the part of the liberal elite towards Red America. Even in the way mainstream press reports on Red America, quote unquote, is with a lot of sort of talking down to them. And that doesn't help. That half of America has recognized that, people resent them for who they are because they don't share their cultural values, they're not politically correct, or they're more Christian, or they're, whole bunch of cultural issues that come in. Now, unless that changes, I don't
you think it's the responsibility, the onus for this healing lies on the liberals, to reach out to the other side, and the other side really doesn't care that much to reach out to the liberal side?
Well, as long as the Electoral College exists, rural voters and whatever they think is going to remain important in American politics.
Sure,
so if the Democratic Party wants to be the tent and of every, group of people, it has to reach out, right? And that's not been happening. I just don't sense it. From the moment Trump came in, he was considered illegitimate. To Nathan's point, now he's criticizing Republicans for considering Biden little bit, till all the votes are counted. I'm not getting into the politics of that, but I would just like to remind viewers that from the day he came in, he was considered illegitimate. Trump, that is. That's what America is today. It's 50-50, and we can dress it up whichever way we like, but one half is not talking to the other or understanding the other.
All right, Puneet, what next for the Republican Party? As Nathan said, Trump may be gone. Of course, maybe you don't agree, but Trump may be gone, but Trumpism is here to stay. So, what do you see next for the Republican Party now?
I see very strong. I believe that we'll take back the Congress in 2 years. Trump is going to be a huge factor, especially as Seema pointed out, that there is what Trump captured was the frustration, disappointment of the elitist, political scratch my back and I scratch yours, and being part of the world norm. And most importantly, redefining America and making it really great again, bringing back jobs which are lost in various facets of industry, from manufacturing to environmental to you name it, to all scape. And you've seen that has reflected in the strong economy we've had till COVID hit us or the Chinese flu hit us. I believe that we have some great leaders emerging. Tom Cotton, Nikki Haley, Vice President Pence. We'll have a new group of Republican leadership who will basically define a mixture of what Seema has said, is really reaching out to the other side because we are one. We have to have the we approach as we, the Americans. And at the same time, you also have to have a commonsensical ideas, because you see people work towards commonsensical ideas and ideas which create jobs. That's the reason why the Hispanics, African Americans, the Asian Americans have basically done so well in terms of voting for President Trump. And third, people do want safety. They want the defunding of police kind of fell flat on BLM and the Liberal Party, and the socialist idea are never going to work in the United States. So there's a lot of these positive things which can be taken in by the Republican leadership and basically translate into a successful leadership. And I believe the Biden presidency, if it will be, or whoever it is, I hope it is Trump, but if it is going to be Biden, it's going to be a complete failure and a disaster. Because guess what? There'll be the left pulling him, and then of course Kamala Harris positioning herself to be the next president. So there is going to be a lot of chaos within the Democratic Party, and I believe that the people who are bad actors are going to have a free ride in the next few years.
All right, well, let's talk about India now. And Seema, what do you think the Biden administration will mean for Indo-US relationship?
See, broadly, the relationship is strong, and both Republicans and Democrats support a strong relationship with India. So the broad trajectory will continue. There might be certain, nuances that might be different. For example, climate change has been mentioned as one of the issues that the Biden administration would focus on. So that will be one thing where, India and the US will cooperate more. India has, India would welcome the US rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement. Again, what it'll all depend on is who the personnel are, who Biden chooses as his Secretary of State, his Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, and finally the Ambassador to India. All of that is yet to be decided, but broadly, the Indo-Pacific strategy that, again, Trump and Mike Pompeo did quite a bit to sort of strengthen and make the mechanism of the Quad, which is the sort of grouping of the US, India, Australia, and Japan, it raised it to a level from which, if a incoming Biden administration wants, they can take it forward. And that's basically a mechanism that is kind of a signal to China that, look, you don't get to rule Asia. There are others who have a say in the matter. So all these things should broadly continue. India is a major defense partner of the United States. That happened under the Obama administration. A President-elect Biden knows India very well. He's been a supporter of India ever since he was a senator. He was crucial in the passage of the Indo-US nuclear deal. He was one of the first to sort of say that sanctions against India should be lifted, which were imposed, if you remember, in 1998 after India conducted the nuclear test.
Nuclear test, yes.
So all of those things are all positives. The one wrinkle I see might be there'll be more emphasis on, the domestic situation in India, for example. And Kashmir could come up as an issue, human rights, the rights of minorities, religious freedom, all of these things may come more in front than they were in a Trump administration.
Right, that is something that is being anticipated here. And just briefly, the fact that our Prime Minister endorsed Trump, as I said, there are many supporters of Trump here in India, that's all water under the bridge now?
Pretty much. I mean, in realpolitik, everybody does what they need to do, and people reset their game plan. And Democrats understand that. They may tease Indian leaders and Indian diplomats a bit about that slogan and the Houston rally, but that's about it. Because when it comes down to national interest and two big countries working together on international issues, I don't think any, rational-minded Democrat is going to hold it against the Prime Minister.
Sure. Nathan, coming back to you about the way the Biden administration, is going to be structured and is going to look, are you hopeful that Bernie Sanders is going to get a role?
Well, I hope he would not get a role within the Biden White House, because I think that would just be simply a bad choice for him. There's been talk about him as labor secretary, which, at first you think, perfect, Bernie, a socialist as labor secretary. But actually having him inside the White House, unable to be an independent critic of it, I think would be a very, very bad move for him from the perspective of building the kind of left movement that he's working on. I doubt the Biden administration would let him in anyway, but it actually would be a good strategic choice on their part to sort of quiet him by offering him some kind of role. My hope is that he will remain in the Senate and he will be a powerful independent critic of Biden. As I mentioned earlier, the left, we see our job as pushing for the things that we think are so important, right? Which is universal health care, which is a serious climate plan, etc. And so his job over the next 4 years will be to point out when Biden is falling short on those things.
All right, Bhaskar, now Biden is somebody who had also supported, the Iraq war, and what is your view on what his foreign policy may be like?
Well, I think that there's generally a bipartisan consensus in the United States on foreign policy, which definitely includes the willingness to engage in reckless war. It seems like the appetite of the country is in such a place where that's not very feasible. If you think about the places where there was the most saber rattling from the Trump administration, it was in relationship with Iran. And of course, the chief diplomatic victory of the Obama years was the Iran deal, which Biden is keen to restore. So if anything, I imagine there'll be a ratcheting down of tensions there. I think I obviously it's hard to tell. I agree completely with Nathan that the job of the left is to be an opposition. not to be a junior partner in the Biden administration. And we don't have a parliamentary system. We have a very unusual system that's more like the parties are loose coalitions of various different factions who have no discipline with each other, no way to coordinate. Within the Republican tent, you have libertarians, you have Christian conservatives of a more traditional variety, you have the new Trump right populists, and they have an uneasy relationship. Within the Democratic Party, for many, many decades, the left has been extinguished. Now the left is actually a visible part of the Democratic Party. So we'll see where it goes, but I see primarily our goal is to be one of opposition, not critical support. And the only thing I'm worried about really with the Biden administration on the foreign policy direction immediately, obviously beyond continuing U.S. crimes like support for the Saudi war on Yemen and other things like that, is a continued saber rattling as it relates to China. Mind you, China has a whole set of authoritarian political practices that should be criticized, but many of its other maneuvers are just the actions of a developing nation that's been quite successful in lifting up millions of its own people out of poverty, quite successful in a mode of state-managed liberalism that I think countries like India and Brazil would do well to emulate. And I'm very wary of the idea of a Biden administration creating this narrative of inevitable conflict between China and the rest of Asia, and between China and the United States. It's absolutely not inevitable. Countries can develop. It's not a zero-sum game. There's enough of the world to go around, and we really need to ratchet down tensions and bring China to the table and engage far more productively than the Trump administration does. And again, it can be done in a way that brings more prosperity to the people of India, the United States, and China. Not a zero-sum game.
Right. Puneet, your response to that? I could see you smiling.
Yeah, I'll find ways to say this is the will of the world, that China has brought a lot of people out of poverty, and of course, don't even talk about other abuses that has gone on
oh, he
what
did
they've done.
say, there are a
Yeah.
lot of problems with China, but he appreciated some
Sure.
of the, factors.
But I think that's how the liberal left and the media will try to find a way to define China. But I think the opportunity with India and the world is huge, with especially for India. I think India plays a very instrumental role, especially to take on China. But it's important that India should also get its house in order. The ease of doing business and human rights issues and all these other things, they should get it all settled and done and get to a tangible goal of doing business. As Seema said, talks don't translate into dollars and cents. Talks carry on. Let's translate that into a successful dollar and cent. And I believe what President Trump was trying to do is to undermine the United Nations, and especially now with the Chinese won the goodwill ambassador, President Xi's wife, to become the goodwill ambassador for UNESCO. Well, if the world is going to basically bow down to China, then let's roll up and do it right now. And that starts with first with India, because they are the ones who are going to be most impacted. I think with President Trump, India had one of the finest partners in that aspect. And most importantly, I believe that my
right.
one thing would be is to basically defund United Nations, create another organization with like-minded countries, with India and the Saudis. Look at the Abraham Accord. It's one of the finest accords, which is to find peace.
This is going to be a whole other debate. So, Seema, finally, I just want to talk about this group of progressives within the Democrat Party, and it seems that they're going to be a challenge as well to the Biden-Harris administration.
Absolutely. I think there'll be a minor civil war within the Democratic Party, because as it is, some of the moderate Democrats have taken on the progressives, saying that all this talk of socialism and defunding the police cost some of them seats in the House of Representatives. And that's a very real thing. The Democrats have lost seats instead of having a blowout. I mean, that's as big a shock as they could get. So yes, there will be a lot of pulls and pushes, and how that pans out, I do not know. But about Bernie Sanders, I know he's interested in the position of Labor Secretary. I think that would be great if he got that. But again, those are calculations Biden would have to make. Losing any senator at this time and making him a cabinet officer would mean you lose, even more seats in the Senate, and that's complicated. And I think the overall question is, can the United States function? I mean, it's so divided right now, so polarized. It's divided states of America, almost. And is, Cold War kind of imposed a discipline, I would say, on the U.S. So it kept its squabbles to a minimum. Now, those squabbles are for all to see. And
indeed, the whole world is watching. Yes, well, thank you so much. We're completely out of time on our session, but many, many people who are viewing us right now have lots of questions for all of you. Veronica?
Thank you so much for that riveting discussion, dear panelists. These questions have actually been collected from various viewing platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. There's a question for Nathan from Prashant Singh. What will Biden's presidency hold for U.S. troops in the Middle East and stance on PRC? And will Biden raise the minimum wage?
Well, it's really quite hard to say because the Obama administration's policies were so mixed here. As Bhaskar said, there's a sort of continuity between Democratic and Republican foreign policy. So I wouldn't expect actually to see a massive shift. You might see a toning down of the more bellicose rhetoric. But one of the things that perhaps surprised a lot of people about Obama was how little was altered from the Bush foreign policy in the Middle East, and obviously he was criticized heavily for his willingness to again assist the Saudis in Yemen and the use of U.S. drones in Afghanistan and elsewhere. So it really is quite hard to say because I think there are competing instincts that Biden has. As for raising the minimum wage, that's not something that Biden can do unilaterally. The Democratic platform now is officially in support of a $15 minimum wage, which I think is a positive. It's happened in a lot of places around the country, including Florida, which went for Trump, now has a $15 minimum wage. The Fight for 15 movement is succeeding around the country, so I think you'll see a $15 minimum wage in a lot more states. Of course, if the Democrats don't have Congress, it's not going to happen at the federal level. But the Fight for 15 movement has been a real progressive success, and I think is going to continue.
Thank you for that. We have a question for Seema. Sangeeta Kevalramani and Sumita Banerjee both would like to know, will Biden restore the nuclear deal with Iran and relations with Cuba? And what will be Biden's stance on Israel-Palestine?
Okay, so again, he has talked about it as long as the Iranians are willing to put some curbs on fissile materials, because over the past 3 years, their stockpiles have gone up. So he would certainly be interested in reopening reopening talks with Iran. But Iranians will have to wonder whether, if they sign another deal 4 years later, if, let's say, Republicans come back to power, they will again renege on that deal. Mood swings in American foreign policy. So there I would disagree with my co-panelists that there is tremendous continuity. I think there is a lot of mood swing between Republicans and Democrats for certain countries. Iran is one good example. As for the Israel-Palestinian question, it would be difficult to go back to square one because things have moved over the past 4 years. Even Arab nations are, making friends with Israel. So how do you go back to demanding what the Palestinians' bottom line was? So it's going to be very interesting how he navigates. But one thing we can be sure of, he'll have many experts, many more experts than Trump ever did, and they'll bring eons of experience with them.
Right. We have a question for Puneet from Ritvik Saha. Trump came to power saying he'll be helping the working class, but did nothing, and instead gave the wealthy tax rebates. Could you shed some light on that?
Well, that's the reason the rural America, the red America votes and supports President Trump, and overwhelmingly did that. So what the minorities did that. They're not the ones who are the wealthy Americans or the ones. But yes, he did give the tax breaks, which helped to create a lot of jobs, huge, strong economy, and we had a strong GDP growth till the Chinese virus came in. I believe that President Trump did renegotiated a NAFTA, which a new agreement with Mexico and Canada, brought back manufacturing, and most importantly, was trying to bring the supply chains back to the United States away from China. And again, strengthen the partners with people who are like-minded, people who believe in free economy. And I think that's what President Trump has done. He's done a tremendous job, especially in the blue-collar field. And it's unfortunate. I wish there was a clear mandate, even though it was very close. But I wish we can carry on those great ideas he came up with.
We have a question for Bhaskar from Mithilesh Jha. Differences on domestic, global, economic and climate issues aside, what is your take on the future of electoral politics in US and beyond?
Well, that's an incredibly broad question. I should say that in the United States, yes, there is political polarization, but it's really important to note that there's nothing that unique about American political polarization. The United States, what was unique is that throughout much of the 20th century, the U.S. had less political polarization than other countries. Now we, by world standards, have average levels of political polarization. The problem is we have a very unusual political structure, a presidential structure, a federal structure that is uniquely difficult to deal with polarization. So we have many choke points, many points where a minority can hinder administration. In another country with a parliamentary system, if you win in our election, but you have enough to maintain a government, you could govern. In the U.S., even when you win elections, even when you have a Congress too, you're basically running the equivalent of a minority government, and it's very difficult. So Americans are both saying they want the government to do more. So that's going up in all these opinion polls, belief that the government should do more for them, but also belief in the ability of government to do things for them is declining, and that's a very dangerous combination. And the solution to that, I believe, is not to try to go backwards, rewind to time without this political polarization. Because actually, in many ways, the lack of political polarization was as a result of, let's say, minorities and women and working class people and others not even getting their voices heard. So that's not something I want to go back to. But it's to take the existing polarization, which is maybe a 52-48% polarization, and turn it into a 60-40 coalition, a coalition that could actually govern, that has a mandate. And for the Democratic Party, I think that means pushing issues, not of culture war, not of the various narratives you hear in the media, but of economic egalitarianism, telling to average American people, you work hard, you're playing by the rules, and you deserve more. And I think there is 60% of the country that can get behind that. If you look at polling for Medicare for All, if you look at polling for a $15 minimum wage, these are all more popular than either liberalism or Trumpism. And I think this is the future. And I think, to the extent that can apply to the global level, I think that's true in the battle against any form of communitarianism, any form of narrow right-wing populism. We have to tell people there's more than enough for everyone, and we can create a system that creates prosperity, wealth, and security for all.
Right. We have a question for Seema and Bhaskar. What are your views about the future of electoral? Sorry, we already went for that one. This is a question for Nathan by Ashwin Raghunathan. What policies do you think Biden can achieve using executive action?
Well, there's a number of things. The first thing he can do is roll back a number of the Trump administration's more cruel initiatives on immigration. He can investigate and hold accountable police departments that have widespread abuses. He can put back in place a lot of the environmental regulations. The Trump administration stripped environmental regulations, has already had terrible pollution consequences, and also reinstitute the Clean Power Plan and such. He can, on labor, hopefully, the Trump administration has essentially been gutting some very, very important regulations, things on occupational safety and health, for instance, and the Biden administration can change a lot of that. The Department of Education, we're talking about forgiving student debt. Now, a lot of things that he might do might be overturned by the courts, but one thing that I would hope the Biden administration would do is to really push the limits on this, because and to try and accomplish as many of its goals via executive action as possible, and then see if courts will uphold or overturn it, because a lot of that is political. It's often unsettled law just how far the president's powers extend, and George Bush and Barack Obama both try to flex the president's powers, and I hope that we see the Biden administration do the same.
We have a question for Seema, which is similar to what Bhaskar was asked. What are your views about the future of electoral politics in the US, in particular the prospect of publicly funded elections?
Wow, in an election that $14 billion was spent to talk about public funding, that's a dream. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I mean, the vested interests here, everybody uses the elections, the lobby groups and lobbyists use the elections to get their, favorite thing on the platform. I think it would be the wisest thing the Americans did if they had public funding. They had, a limited time for campaigning. And if they had an electoral sort of federal bureaucracy to look after the elections, and those who were sort of non-partisan, just plain old bureaucrats, I think it would all help a lot. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. Every election here, and I've been here for several now, the amount of money that is spent, it just is mind-numbing. And it's criminal at one level, because on the one hand, you see the country's politicians unable to negotiate a stimulus package when millions of Americans are hurting. On the other hand, these fat cats are giving millions of dollars. And rules are so vague, about how much you can give, how you can give. It's shameful.
Right. Seema, there's another question for you from Prashant Singh. Will President-elect Joe Biden work towards getting rid of student debt?
Oh, wow. I think my co-panelists might be better able to handle that. There is pressure on him to do that. He has sort of vaguely hinted that he might, but the Republicans are not in favor, and everything that's going to happen in the next 4 years will have to face the fact that it's going to be probably a divided government, with Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, remaining the Majority Leader, and he is not someone very easy to deal with for the Democrats.
Maybe get in, Nathan, a quick comment on that.
Well, I would hope that the Biden administration would act on this. There's a lot of there's a lot of pushback from sort of liberal policy types on canceling student debt. The idea that it rewards people who are slightly wealthier, and so I worry that even if the Biden administration starts off by recognizing there's a problem, there's going to be a lot of pressure on them, kind of disingenuously using the argument, well, there are other people who you should help more. Of course, there are. I don't want to see them just cancel student debt. And medical debt is probably far even more important. We want to see that as part of a big, broad package of sort of helping people who are crushed economically.
Thank you so much for that. As we come to the end of this session, I'd like to ask the chair for their closing remarks regarding the discussion or the topic at large.
Thank you so much, Veronica. And it's been an illuminating discussion, and it really gives you a sense of the kind of challenges ahead as the world looks towards the United States. And, we're now looking forward to seeing what the Biden administration is going to do once they do come into power. Puneet, despite whatever you're saying, in January, we are going to see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris being sworn in, and it'll be very, very fascinating to see what they do, in terms of their foreign policy, of course, from India, what they do in terms of the Indo-US relationship, and clearly the issue of healing, which everybody is talking about in America. I think we're all agreed, all the panelists have been talking about the big divide in America. So it'll be interesting to see how Joe Biden, and he's spoken about this in the past, he's quoted an Irish poet, and he's talked about, this hope and healing, and how he wants to, after the tumultuous Trump years, give healing and, repair the soul of America. So that's going to be interesting to see if he does achieve that or how he achieves that. Well, thank you so much all for, speaking to us today and taking your time out. Thank you all who are watching at home.
Thank you so much, dear panelists and Gargi. We're very thankful to you for, shedding light on the impact of what America has, after all, decided for. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear audience, if you enjoyed this panel discussion, may we suggest you to also check out another one around
Thank you, everyone.
and governance, titled Indian Democracy is in Danger, scheduled for 6 p.m. tomorrow, India time. To know more about various other sessions, debates, or book launches, please check out the festival schedule at tatalitlive.in. We hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you so much for being with us at Tata Literature Live. Have a good night and a good day.